Today, we will explore the mysteries surrounding some of the world's most famous fairy tales. So, fasten your seatbelt, because these secrets might just surprise you. The mystery of Jack and the Beanstalk. When people mention Jack and the Beanstalk, most will immediately recall a simple fairy tale for children, a story about a poor boy living with his mother in a dilapidated house. He exchanges their last cow for a handful of magic beans and suddenly discovers a world above the clouds, guarded by a fearsome giant and filled with treasures. For so many years, this story has been retold as a miraculous adventure that every one of us has heard at some point in our childhood. Yet few could imagine that beneath that familiar surface lies a mystery far greater than what we have ever assumed. If you have ever thought that this was merely a bedtime story for children, perhaps it is time to reconsider. Because as we begin to peel back each layer of this tale, you will see that it is not only about the bravery or cleverness of a young boy, but it also hides ancient legends, secrets that reach beyond the boundaries of ordinary fairy tales. And so, once you know the truth behind this seemingly harmless legend, you may never look at Jack and the Beanstalk the same way again. This story begins in a very simple way, with the image of Jack, a boy living with his mother in a small, humble house in a poor countryside. The life of Jack and his mother is not easy at all. Day after day, they struggle with poverty and meager meals. The old cow is their last asset, as well as their final hope. Then one day, when almost everything in the house has run out, Jack's mother has no choice but to ask her son to take the cow to the market to try and get some money for food. On the way to the market, Jack meets a strange man. Instead of giving him money, this man holds out a handful of small beans and tells Jack that these are magical beans, capable of bringing luck beyond anything he could imagine. With a curious nature, Jack agrees to trade the cow for the beans. When Jack brings the beans home, his mother cannot hide her disappointment. She knows this was their last chance to save the family from starvation. But now, all that remains are a few worthless beans. In her anger, Jack's mother throws all the beans out the window and makes Jack go to bed hungry. Yet, something extraordinary happens that very night. When dawn breaks, Jack is astonished to see a giant beanstalk growing from the spot where his mother had thrown the beans the day before. The stalk is so tall that it reaches up to the sky, piercing through thick white clouds. Driven by curiosity and a dream of changing his life, Jack decides to climb the beanstalk to find out what mysteries await above. After a long climb up through the layers of clouds, Jack finally sets foot at the top of the beanstalk. Here, he is amazed to see a huge castle floating in the sky. When Jack approaches and knocks on the door, it is answered by a giant woman. She looks at Jack with a mix of worry and warns him that her husband is very fond of eating children. However, seeing that Jack is hungry and exhausted, the giant's wife still decides to help him. She secretly gives Jack some bread, cheese, and a bowl of milk, then hides him in the kitchen to keep him from being discovered by her husband. When the giant comes home, the sound of his footsteps shakes the entire castle. As soon as he enters, he sniffs the air and, in a threatening voice, declares that he can smell the flesh of a child. But the giant's wife quickly denies this and keeps Jack safe. After dinner, the giant falls asleep beside a large bag of gold. At that moment, Jack sees his chance. He quietly steals the bag of gold and escapes safely down the beanstalk and back home. That gold helps Jack and his mother live comfortably for a time, but eventually the money runs out and their life returns to hardship. Once again, curiosity and hope for a better life urge Jack to climb the beanstalk a second time. This time too, the giant's wife helps him and hides him away. Watching carefully, Jack notices the giant's hen that can lay golden eggs. When the giant falls asleep, Jack quickly steals the hen and silently leaves the castle. Returning home with the magical hen, Jack and his mother enjoy another period of abundance, but Jack himself still cannot let go of his longing for adventure and the hope for more miracles. On his last journey up the beanstalk, Jack notices a golden harp that can sing beautiful melodies by itself. But as soon as Jack takes the harp out of the castle, the harp cries out for help, causing the giant to wake up and realize Jack's presence. A tense chase follows, with Jack clutching the harp as he races down the beanstalk and the furious giant chasing right behind him. When they are nearly at the ground, Jack calls for his mother to bring an axe, and he strikes hard at the base of the beanstalk. The giant beanstalk collapses, causing the giant to lose his balance and fall from above, dying instantly. From that day on, thanks to the treasures Jack brought back from the castle in the sky, the mother and son no longer had to worry about poverty. However, hidden behind those familiar details, the story still contains many strange and mysterious things that not everyone has heard of. In every version of Jack and the Beanstalk, there is one detail almost everyone remembers by heart: the famous incantation spoken by the giant whenever he senses the presence of a stranger. Fee, fee, foe, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. This line sounds both eerie and strange, and in fact, it is not merely a product of imagination, but has existed for a long time in Western culture. People have heard this chant in Shakespeare's play King Lear, written in 1605, but even in Shakespeare's time, this rhyme was called ancient folklore. Some researchers even believe it may have originated from ancient Gaelic, as a kind of hunting chant or a song of giants in the oldest legends. When we look more broadly across the world, we see the image of the giant recurring in many different cultures. In the Bible, the giant Goliath became a symbol of brute strength when facing David, an ordinary but brave man. In Greek mythology, the story of Odysseus facing the Cyclops Polyphemus is a classic example of a human encountering giant forces. In Norse mythology, the Jotun are powerful beings who exist parallel to, or even before, the gods of the Vikings. This repetition is not accidental, but reflects something deep in the human subconscious. Some scholars have hypothesized that perhaps giants in legends are not simply monsters or villains. They may be faded memories of ancient races or tribes who once lived on Earth. However, due to harsh living environments and dwindling food supplies, they gradually disappeared. Over time, memories of them became distorted and transformed into monstrous giants in stories passed down through generations. If we reconsider Jack's story, we can also ask an opposite question. Are we certain that Jack is truly a hero, or is he simply an invader who enters someone else's world and takes their treasures for himself? From this perspective, Jack is no longer the perfect symbol of courage, but rather takes on the image of a conqueror, representing the desire for possession and power that humanity has carried for thousands of years. That is why these recurring details and the image of the giant not only make the story of Jack and the Beanstalk more captivating, but also hint at a historical and collective psychological depth far beyond a simple fairy tale. Perhaps the most astonishing thing about Jack and the Beanstalk lies not only in the magical details or the image of the giant that we often see in fairy tales, but also in the truly ancient origins of this story. Not until 2016 did folklore researchers truly prove that Jack and the Beanstalk was not the product of England or modern Europe alone, but actually belongs to an ancient group of folk tales called ATU 328, The Boy Who Stole the Ogre's Treasure. Remarkably, this group of tales not only appears in England, but also exists in various forms in Italy, Scandinavia, India, and many other places around the world. Researchers have used genealogical analysis of folk tales, similar to the way we study the evolution of living species, to trace the origins of this plot. The results genuinely surprise the academic world. The story of a poor boy who dares to confront a monster to steal its treasures actually dates back more than 5,000 years, that is, to prehistoric times, before even the greatest civilizations of humanity were born. This story has been passed down orally from generation to generation, and still lives on today in many different forms across cultures. Researchers have even traced the story back to the era of the Proto-Indo-Europeans, an ancient population living on the vast steppes between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. These people lived at the end of the Stone Age and the beginning of the Bronze Age, from about 4,500 to 2,500 BCE. They were nomadic herders, they did not build cities, they left behind no writing, and most of what we know about them comes only from ancient graves and grave goods scattered across endless grasslands. Therefore, Jack and the Beanstalk is not just a simple fairy tale, but a living legacy, a rare thread connecting us to a vanished civilization of history. Each time a generation retells this story, even if just to lull a child to sleep, they are in fact preserving a collective memory that has existed for thousands of years. If you have ever thought the story of Jack was just a small fairy tale, take a moment to look more closely. In fact, Jack and the Beanstalk carries a grand motif that has appeared again and again in many civilizations. The motif of the culture hero, an outsider who dares to cross forbidden boundaries, break into the realm of supernatural powers, and bring back for humanity the most precious things. It is easy to see that stories about culture heroes always begin with a character who seems small, weak, or who does not belong to the world they are about to enter. They are often ordinary people, sometimes pushed to the fringes of society. Yet it is these people who dare to risk facing the mighty guardian and bring back treasures that previously belonged only to the gods. We can see this motif in Greek mythology, where Prometheus dares to steal the fire of heaven from Zeus to bring light and life to humanity, even though the price he pays is to be chained and suffer punishment for all eternity. In Norse mythology, Odin also secretly takes the mead of poetry, a sacred drink that bestows upon humans the ability of poetry, knowledge, and artistic inspiration. To do this, Odin must overcome deadly challenges and deceive the guardians of the sacred mead. If we go back to ancient Sumerian civilization, we find the story of Gilgamesh, who defeated the giant guardian of the forest to take the sacred cedar logs that only the gods were allowed to use. These were the materials used to build cities, create the first civilization, and make humans the center of the world. What is the common thread in all these stories? It is a journey into a forbidden world, or a land of death and supernatural powers, where there are guardians that ordinary people cannot overcome. The protagonist must rise above themselves, using intelligence, courage, or cunning to defeat or outwit the guardian. In the end, they bring back divine treasures that help humanity develop and survive to this day. If we reconsider the image of the magic beanstalk in Jack and the Beanstalk, we see that it is not merely a fanciful detail to lead the character up to the castle in the clouds. In reality, this image represents a universal motif that has appeared in many ancient cultures around the world: the idea of a cosmic axis, a mythical rope or bridge connecting the levels of the universe together. In Greek mythology, there is Mount Olympus, the place where the gods reside at the highest peak, hidden in the clouds, separate from the world of humans. In Norse mythology, there is an even more powerful image, the world tree Yggdrasil. This giant ash tree has roots that sink deep into the realm of the dead. Its trunk passes through the world of humans, and its branches reach the heaven of the gods. Yggdrasil is not only a symbol of life, but also the axis connecting the three great realms of the universe: heaven, earth, and the underworld. The ancient Maya also looked up at the sky and imagined the Milky Way as a giant world tree, where souls after death would walk along to reach the other world. For them, death was not the end, but a journey linking the layers of the universe through this mythical tree. In Hindu philosophy, the image of the Ashvatha tree also carries deep meaning. Its roots stretch upward into the sky, while its branches and leaves reach down to the earth, like a bridge between the world of the gods and that of humans. All of these images emphasize one thing: the tree, axis, or bridge is not only a physical symbol, but also a spiritual one, a gateway to another dimension where humans can communicate with the gods or ancestral spirits. And when Jack climbs the magic beanstalk, he is not simply seeking treasure. It is the journey of a soul leaving the real world, crossing the boundary of life and death, entering another realm to face challenges, and returning with something precious for the world of the living. The mystery of Sleeping Beauty. There are many different versions of the story, Sleeping Beauty, but the most famous and widely known is the version written by the Brothers Grimm in their Grimm's Fairy Tales, first published in 1812. From that point on, the image of a beautiful princess with a tragic fate became an unforgettable symbol in Western culture. The story begins with the burning desire for a child from a king and queen. Then one day, as the queen is bathing, a frog suddenly appears and foretells that her wish is about to come true. Just as in that strange prophecy, the queen gives birth to a stunningly beautiful princess. Overjoyed, the king decides to host a grand celebration to welcome the newborn princess. Not only relatives and friends, but 13 powerful fairies of the kingdom are also invited. However, the royal palace has only 12 golden plates for the banquet, and so one fairy is inevitably left off the guest list. It is a decision that sets in motion a tragedy no one could have foreseen. The celebration unfolds, dazzling in candlelight and music. One by one, 12 fairies come forward and bestow magical gifts upon the princess. One grants beauty, another virtue, others bestow wisdom, riches, and every other blessing. But just as the 11th fairy has finished, the atmosphere suddenly grows tense. The 13th fairy appears, her face full of anger at being forgotten. She does not speak to anyone, but looks straight at the princess and coldly utters a curse. On her 15th birthday, the princess will prick her finger on a spindle and die instantly. Horror sweeps through the great hall, yet fortunately, the 12th fairy steps forward and, with her magic, softens the curse. She says that the princess will not die, but instead fall into a deep sleep that will last 100 years. The king and queen, overwhelmed by fear for their child, order every spindle in the kingdom to be destroyed, hoping to prevent the grim fate. Time passes quietly. The princess grows up beautiful and gentle, loved by the whole kingdom. But on her 15th birthday, while her parents are away, Briar Rose curiously wanders through the castle and stumbles upon an old room in the highest tower. Inside, an old woman sits spinning. The young girl asks her about it, and as she reaches out to touch the spindle, the curse is immediately fulfilled. Briar Rose collapses onto a bed, falling into an unending sleep. At that very moment, the entire royal household also falls into a deep slumber. A thick hedge of thorns springs up around the castle, hiding it completely from the outside world. Years slip by, and the tale of the sleeping princess spreads far and wide. Many brave princes try to pass through the thorns to save her, but all lose their lives among the razor-sharp brambles. It is not until exactly 100 years later that a young prince, hearing the legend, sets out for the castle. Strangely, this time, the thorny hedge blossoms with flowers and parts by itself, clearing the way for him. Inside the silent castle, he passes by people asleep, all the way to the highest tower. There, Briar Rose still lies motionless, beautiful as an angel. He leans down and places a kiss upon her lips. Instantly, Briar Rose awakens, and the entire castle stirs to life after its long slumber. Joy overflows, and the prince and Briar Rose celebrate their wedding, living together happily ever after. In 17th century Europe, fairy tales were not just for children, but often contained many elements for adults. One of the earliest and most striking versions of Sleeping Beauty is the story Sun, Moon, and Talia, written by Giambattista Basile in Italy in 1636. This tale begins with a wealthy and powerful family. The protagonist is Talia, the only daughter of a lord. When Talia is born, soothsayers are called to predict her fate. They warn that one day, a tiny sliver of flax will bring disaster upon her. Fearing for his daughter's life, her father bans all flax-related items from the household. Talia grows up healthy and beautiful. One day, as she curiously explores the castle, she encounters an old woman spinning. Unaware of the danger, Talia is fascinated and reaches out to touch the spinning wheel. In that instant, a splinter of flax pierces her finger. Talia falls down and cannot wake up. Although not dead, she lies in a death-like state from which no one can rouse her. Talia's apparent death devastates her father. Unable to bear the pain of losing his daughter, he locks the castle doors, leaves Talia lying there alone, and goes away to live elsewhere. Talia is forgotten, and the years drift by. Many years later, a king, while out hunting, stumbles upon the abandoned castle. When he enters, he finds Talia lying motionless. Her appearance captivates the king. Instead of trying to save her, the king rapes Talia as she remains in her enchanted sleep. Though she does not awaken, Talia becomes pregnant from the encounter. 9 months later, she gives birth to twins, a boy and a girl, who are cared for by mysterious fairies and are named Sun and Moon. One day, one of the twins, thirsty for milk, sucks Talia's finger and pulls out the splinter of flax. Miraculously, Talia awakens and is astonished to find 2 children beside her. The story continues with even more turmoil. The king, after a long time, suddenly remembers Talia and decides to return to the castle. Overjoyed to see Talia and the children, he spends some happy time with them. But when he returns to his palace, things grow complicated. There, the queen becomes suspicious and uncovers the secret of Talia and the twins. Consumed by jealousy, the queen orders the 2 children to be brought to the palace, intending to have them killed and cooked into a meal for the king. Fortunately, the cook entrusted with this task is a good man. He hides the children and uses lamb instead. The queen then wants Talia to be burned alive. At the height of this drama, the king returns just in time. Discovering the queen's crimes, he orders her and her accomplices executed. In the end, the king marries Talia, claims the children, and brings them all to live together in the palace. After so much hardship, they are finally reunited. However, looking back, it is clear that this story contains many elements quite unlike ordinary fairy tales. Through the version of Sun, Moon, and Talia, we see that ancient fairy tales were not always gentle or sweet from the outset. Themes of hardship, tragedy, and even the dark sides of society, the cruelty of power, and the workings of fate are all present in the story in stark detail. Today, the darker elements of the story have been removed or replaced with lighter content to suit children. But if we trace the origins, we understand that fairy tales were once a true mirror of the issues facing society in ancient times. That is why, when people mention Sleeping Beauty, it is not only the rosy world of fairy tales that comes to mind, but also the shadowy corners that few know about. Not merely a creation of imagination or legend, some details in the story of Sleeping Beauty may have roots in real historical events in Europe. One prominent example is the story of Catherine of Valois, wife of Henry V of England. Catherine of Valois died in 1437. After her death, her body was not buried in the usual way. Instead, her remains were preserved and kept at Westminster Abbey, the burial place of English kings and queens. Remarkably, Catherine's body was publicly displayed for nearly 350 years. For a long time, many English people and visitors had the opportunity to view her mummy. In fact, visiting to kiss the mummy of Catherine became a strange ritual practiced by many. Samuel Pepys, a famous English writer and historian, recorded in his diary that on his birthday in 1669, he visited Westminster Abbey and saw Catherine's body with his own eyes. He even recounted that he kissed her lips. This may sound unbelievable today, but at that time, many people were genuinely curious and believed that Catherine's mummy possessed a kind of power or miracle. Those who saw Catherine's remains all described her as looking as if she were sleeping. Her face was so well preserved that many were astonished. The image of a beautiful woman lying with her eyes closed for hundreds of years, yet retaining her graceful appearance, instantly reminded many of Briar Rose in the fairy tale. Beyond the case of Catherine of Valois, Europe also has a phenomenon known as incorruptibility, meaning the bodies of the dead do not decompose over many years, especially among female Catholic saints. In many great churches in Italy, Spain, or France, people have found the bodies of women still intact after death, sometimes even exuding a fragrance regarded as the odor of sanctity. This phenomenon is seen as a sign of purity, holiness, and the miraculous. Many believe it is evidence of the strong faith or virtuous lives of these women. Such incorrupt mummies are often displayed in glass cases in churches, allowing the faithful and pilgrims to admire them and pray. The image of a woman who remains beautiful and unspoiled after death has become deeply etched in the minds of many generations. That is why, when reading Sleeping Beauty, many recognize that the enduring beauty of the princess sleeping for 100 years may have roots in these extraordinary real-life phenomena. The mystery of Snow White. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? This familiar question not only echoes in the memories of generations of viewers through Disney's famous 1937 animated film Snow White, but it also opens a door, leading us into a mysterious world filled with dark turns behind the fairy tale facade. Behind Disney's sweet imagery lies a long, complex, and at times chilling history that was first recorded by the Brothers Grimm in 1812. Perhaps few people realize that Snow White did not always exist as the happy princess living with 7 dwarfs and blessed with a happy ending. Alongside Disney's bright retelling is a vastly different original, one in which the struggle for survival lingers over every step the characters take. While the familiar image of Snow White from Disney is closely linked to an evil stepmother in the Brothers Grimm's original version, the villain was in fact her own biological mother. She was the woman who once sat by a window on a cold winter's day as snowflakes drifted down and covered the world outside, and in that moment, she wished for a daughter with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. That wish was granted, but it was also the beginning of tragedy. As Snow White grew, her radiant beauty became the source of jealousy within her mother's heart. Day after day, the obsession with beauty and power drove her to consult the magic mirror, always asking who was the most beautiful in the land. And one day, the answer from the mirror became an invisible sentence. The queen is indeed fair, but Snow White is 1,000 times more beautiful. Tormented by this truth, the queen wasted no time in plotting to eliminate her own daughter. She hired a huntsman and ordered him to take Snow White deep into the forest and kill her, then return with her heart and lungs for the queen to eat. In ancient thinking, eating the organs of the young was believed to bring strength and eternal beauty. But the huntsman's compassion spared Snow White's life. He decided to let her go and killed a wild boar instead, taking its heart and lungs back as proof. Alone, Snow White wandered lost through the dark forest until she happened upon the small house of the 7 dwarfs. It was these unusual friends who welcomed her and offered her a safe haven deep in the woods. One might think that danger was behind her, but the queen's hatred only grew. She disguised herself 3 times in order to kill her daughter, each time employing a more devious trick than before. First, a suffocating lace bodice, then a poisoned comb, and finally, a gleaming red apple laced with deadly poison. Each time, Snow White narrowly escaped death, and only thanks to the dwarf's quick thinking did she survive the first 2 attempts. But the third time, after biting into the apple, she collapsed, lifeless. In sorrow, the 7 dwarfs placed Snow White in a glass coffin, unable to bury her because she still looked as beautiful as if she were only asleep. Time passed until one day a prince passing by was captivated by her pure beauty. The prince asked to take the coffin home. On the way, a tired servant accidentally struck Snow White's back, dislodging the piece of poisoned apple from her throat. As if by miracle, she awoke, to the astonishment of everyone. What seemed to be a happy ending closes with a truly cruel punishment for the wicked mother. When she heard that Snow White was alive and about to marry the prince, she attended the wedding. But there she was, forced to wear red-hot iron shoes and dance until she collapsed and died. This image is both a reckoning and a warning against cruelty and envy, making the original tale of Snow White one of the most haunting fairy tales ever told. Delving deeper into the real history behind Snow White, many researchers believe this legend is not merely the product of imagination, but may have its roots in real lives. The name Maria Sophia von Earthal is often mentioned as the most likely candidate for the real-life inspiration behind Snow White. Maria Sophia von Earthal was born in 1725 in the town of Lohr am Main, a peaceful region in Western Germany. Her family was not only wealthy, but also famed for possessing a large mirror with a lavish red and silver frame, which is still displayed at Lohr Castle, now the city's museum. Uniquely, this mirror was long believed by locals to speak only the truth. Outside Lohr Castle stretches the dense Spessart forest, renowned for its rare medicinal herbs, but also home to the belladonna, or deadly nightshade, a potent poison once used in ancient medicine. The toxicity of belladonna calls to mind the detail of the poisoned apple in the Snow White tale. Maria Sophia's life was also marked by its own singularities. She remained single her entire life, renowned for her kindness and charitable works. After her death in 1796, her tombstone at the Diocesan Museum in Bamberg was inscribed, "Christian heroine, resting after the victory of faith, awaiting resurrection." Coincidentally, this detail recalls the miraculous resurrection of Snow White after her near death, as a symbol of good triumphing over darkness. But the story of Snow White's origins does not end there. Another figure, Margaretha von Waldeck, is also believed to be a significant source of inspiration. Born in 1533, Margaretha was the daughter of the Count of Waldeck in Western Germany. Her life was closely connected to the region's vast copper mines, where local children labored in harsh conditions, becoming stunted and hunched, a fact that led the people to affectionately call them the poor dwarfs. Margaretha's family owned as many as 7 large copper mines, a detail that so readily calls to mind the image of the 7 dwarfs in the fairy tale. Furthermore, her village was once struck by a mass poisoning when a farmer, suspecting children of theft, handed out poisoned apples, resulting in many tragic deaths. Margaretha herself lived a life shadowed by tragedy. She died mysteriously at just 21, and many records suggest she was poisoned due to religious and political intrigue during a time of turmoil in Europe. Today, her grave remains at the Franciscan monastery, a silent witness to the upheavals of the past. Looking back on these 2 real-life stories, it is easy to understand why scholars and storytellers through the generations have endlessly debated the true origins of Snow White. Perhaps legends and the cruelty of history in these regions gradually took on a mythic hue, eventually transforming into one of the most widely retold stories in human history. It is astonishing that the central motifs of the Snow White story are not confined to German culture alone, but have spread and transformed across a multitude of cultures around the world. In every land, elements like beauty envied, the pursuit by a jealous mother, and the magical return from death are retold with unique shades and details, creating a diverse mosaic that still reflects very human anxieties and aspirations. In Ireland, people still tell the tale of Deirdre, a beautiful maiden prophesied to fall in love with a man with black hair, rosy cheeks, and white skin. That prophecy turned her life into a tragedy of flight and sorrow, as jealousy and hatred stirred among the most powerful. Although not identical to Snow White, the similarities in appearance and fate have led many scholars to see Deirdre as one of the oldest inspirations for the fairy tale we know today. In distant Italy, the story The Young Slave from 1634 also contains familiar strange elements. The main character, Lisa, is poisoned by her stepmother with a comb, then locked in 7 crystal coffins. Years go by, but the girl does not die. She simply slumbers until a miracle brings her back to life. In Greek mythology, we find the tale of Chione, a name that means snow. Chione was famed for her extraordinary beauty, so much so that the gods Hermes and Apollo both fell in love with her. But her beauty also brought tragedy, as the gods used their power to send her into an enchanted sleep, pulling her into a spiral of heartbreaking fate. In Scotland, the fairy tale Gold Tree and Silver Tree tells of a queen tormented by a magic salmon's answer that her daughter is the fairest of them all. Consumed by jealousy, the queen plots to kill her own daughter and eat her organs, hoping to possess her beauty and vitality. But in this tale, the king secretly saves his daughter, sending her away to a distant land to escape certain death. Looking back, we can see that stories like Snow White do not stand alone. They are the distillation of centuries of oral tradition, a tapestry woven from fear, hope, and dreams that belong not just to one culture, but to the heritage of all humanity. That is why, wherever you are, tales of beauty, envy, and miraculous returns from death continue to be told and retold, endlessly changing across eras and across every new land. Thank you for following today's story. If you found these historical mysteries fascinating, be sure to subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends. Don't forget to leave a comment below about the detail that impressed you the most. See you again in the next videos.